Good morning and welcome back to Black Bear Forge. Today I thought we would take a look at some Blacksmiths double calipers. These are really useful at the anvil when you're doing hot work because you can set one side of these to the thickness of your material, set the other side to the width of the material, and as you size things you've got a quick, easy reference. Now these are a very common item in most blacksmith shops. I don't know if they were ever made commercially or not. I have seen these all over the place at blacksmiths gatherings, other people's shops, antique stores, sales, auctions, all sorts of places that you run across these things, and I have never seen two pair that are the same, and I've never seen a pair that have a mark on it that looks like it was a commercial product. The two I have, this is a set I made that has two unequal legs, so you've got one that can be set really wide if you want, and one that's for smaller measurement. And these are friction fit. There's no wing, no screws, so they have to be made fairly tight to work properly. This other set is an antique set that I bought somewhere, have no idea who made it, and both arms of the caliper come off at the same point. With both wings in the middle, there is a chance that a single rivet, when you move one, you're going to move the other. Now there is a way around that. If you punch a square hole in the center bar and use a square rivet and then round the ends up where they go through the other bars, leaving only the square rivet in the middle bar, it can't turn, but it allows these to turn on the ends on either side, and that works out okay. Now today I think I'm going to do one more like this because I think it's a little bit simpler approach. You don't have to worry about messing with square holes and square rivets and all that kind of stuff. But if you want to do one like this, it's certainly an option. I think Daniel Moss over at Trust Me I'm a Blacksmith did one like this, and if I can find that video, I'll link to it right up here. I don't remember if he used the square rivet or not, but there's a good chance he did, so if you're interested in that, go watch his video. It also gives you another option. Since these things are almost always shop made, there is no standard size, there's no standard dimensions, no standard for the starting material you use. Whatever you want to use, whatever size you want to make them suit your work. If you're doing really big, heavy work, you might want to pair with a longer handle to keep your hand away from the heat. If you're doing smaller, more delicate work, a shorter handle is probably better. And I think the ones we'll make today will be just a little bit smaller than this set. Now both of these are made out of 1/8" thick material, which is roughly 3 millimeters. Again, that isn't all that important. Unfortunately, I don't have any material that's exactly the same size as either of these, but like I say, it doesn't matter much. What I did have was some 1/4 by 1/2, or roughly 6 millimeters by 13 millimeters. So I decided to thin that out. I let it spread out however wide it wanted to be. So this comes out to about 5/8 wide or 16 millimeters, and it's about 5 millimeters thick or 3/16 of an inch thick. It is not as perfectly even as a milled bar coming from your steel mill, but it's really not going to matter. This is such a simple tool. This is one area that we as blacksmiths have an advantage over other metal workers, is that we can take a piece of material and change its basic dimensions so we can have the material we want. So I think this is going to be just fine for our calipers. So I'm going to go ahead and just cut this off on the bandsaw. I'll meet you over at the anvil and we'll get started. So I went ahead and cut the bar in half. That gives me one 12-inch piece, which is about 30 centimeters long. And then I decided to cut the other one at 5 inches, which is about 12.5 centimeters. This wasn't quite exactly 2 feet long, so that leaves me another one that's about 17 centimeters or 6.5 inches long. And these two will become the arms, and because we're not going to pin them in the same place, there needs to be one a little bit longer than the other one. I want to start by putting a ring on the piece that will be the handle, and I'm going to start this by slitting with a chisel and then drifting it and forging it to a round ring. By slitting with a chisel, we get a little bit more area on the inside of the ring, so it's easier to make a larger ring. If you just want a little 1/4-inch hole or something, you can certainly punch that, hang it on a nail, but I like the little bit bigger ring. For one thing, it gives you a better grip with your hand, but I think it looks better as well. Try and split the difference side to side and come about that same distance down from the end. To start with, the most important thing is just making sure you're centered. Don't get carried away if you're not centered. This may take a couple of heats, and you don't want to go all the way through into your anvil, so I'm going to use a cutting plate from here on out. Kind of like punching a hole. That should give us a mark on the back side that we can find. Kind of a little shiny place. And hopefully we can get centered over and go right into our slot. It should have a slot through. I can't quite see daylight yet, but you can see it has cut. So the next thing to do will be to start drifting this a little bit. And for that, I just pulled this drift out of the drawer of drifts. I don't know what it was made for originally, but it should work just fine for this. For this little stuff like this, you could easily make a drift out of mild steel to start this. All I really need to do is just open the hole up. I'm going to move side to side in the Pritchell hole so I don't collapse it into there. That's really all I need to do for now. Hopefully we can now go over the horn of the anvil. Hopefully you can get this over the horn. My horn is a little bit blunt, so it just barely fits at this point. You just want to draw out the ring till it's the size you want it to be. You may need to flatten it on the face every now and then. Make sure you get these corners tucked in, but don't get too carried away in any one place. It's easy to end up with thin spots doing it this way. But you can see how we're getting a much nicer ring. Now if you have uneven spots, this is stretching a little bit more here than it is here. That's a little fatter. So I'll get it hot again. I'll draw this side out some and see if I can offset that and get it all back in line. And if you work on the thin side, it's just going to get thinner. So pay attention to which side needs to be worked on here. And I'm just going to work it out like that. That's getting much better. And we can straighten out all the deformities we've just put in there. That ring is still pretty darn rough. So I'm going to take a big tapered punch, just a round tapered punch, and go back into the Pritchell hole here. And that's going to clean up the inside of that ring quite nicely, I think. You just use a tapered pin like a hinge eye pin if that's all you have. I think one more heat just to straighten that out. It's still a little thin, or still a little thick right through here. Instead of forging that and messing with it anymore, because I like the size of the hole now, I'll probably just file that to get that back in line. I'm going to put the punch in from the other side. Since it's tapered, this will create a little bit of a slope towards each face instead of all from one side. Mostly what I'm doing is just trying to get that all offset to the center. You can do this on a little cone mandrel on the anvil as well. Use the tools you have at your disposal. So that's just going to get filed up to make that as perfectly round and even. You can mess with it some more at the anvil and you can get it almost perfect right at the anvil. But I think I'll save some video time here. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and bevel this for the area that is going to be the handle part, which will probably be down into about here. And that's just a matter of putting a little chamfer on here. It's just to make it comfortable to hold. While I'm working on this end, I'm going to go ahead and put my touch mark in here. So ultimately this needs to have 2 points at this end. And I'm going to draw it out to a short taper first to get the point established. And then we'll split that point and take it both directions. I think that's all we need to do to that. The next thing we want to do is split it. Now you can certainly split this with a chisel, but that tends to leave kind of a beveled surface that I don't think I like on the inside of this. I think I want to leave this fairly crisp and fairly square, so I would rather saw that. So I've gone ahead and marked a center line on here. And I'm going to cut about 2.5 inches here. That's about 60 millimeters. It's just whatever you feel like you need. And a bandsaw would work just fine. I'm only showing it this way because not everybody has a bandsaw. Pays to practice with a hacksaw so you can cut a straight line. But it really doesn't take long to do it by hand. I'm a little off down here, so I'm going to have to do a little forging to clean that up. So I'm pretty disappointed with myself for getting that off like that. But it won't really affect the use of the tool in the long run. First thing I want to do is open this up a little bit. And of course, the one that is thin is going to bend out much faster and easier. Let's see if I can just chisel a little bit of this other one off to clean it up some. That should bring it down to about the same. Because I'm chiseling straight down, I don't get that bevel that concerned me before. I suppose you could chisel it that way, but it's really hard to make a long controlled split like that. Now let's take it to the anvil. So now this is just a matter of opening these up and forging them until they're the same. Which, if you do a better job splitting than I did, they would already be closer to the same. Be real careful not to get this one too thin, even though it still needs some forging to shape it. Now we want to put a nice little curve in here. This will place wider material would certainly look better, I think. But again, all that's aesthetic appearance and doesn't affect the use of the tool. You do want these pointing out at about 90 degrees to the handle in the long run. Make these as even as you can. So something about like that. I think I'm going to do a little bit of filing in here before we're all done with it to clean it up. Now let's go on to do the movable arms. The first thing I'm going to do with the arms is put the hole in that'll be the pivot point. This is just like every other time we've punched a hole. Oop, except I got it off. Start from one side, create a target mark on the back that you can find with the punch. Start through there, and then punch through into a bolster or over the pritchel hole. This little punch would be better off over a bolster. And I think we'll clean that up just a little bit. So we'll go over a bolster with this one. It should be a little bit simpler. And it leaves a cleaner hole, so that's the better idea. And it pays to make some bolsters. It's just mild steel with holes drilled in it for different size punches. I'm going to go ahead and drift these to 3/8, which is a fairly big pin. And if you don't want to go that big, it might be better to just drill the holes than it is to punch them. Just up to what you'd like to do. And then I will file this cleaner around here to make it nice and round right there. Make sure your drift isn't too hot if you're doing two of these back to back. Those will work just fine. Let's turn them around and we'll draw out a taper that matches the first piece. So we're going to want to draw out a taper on these arms that the end is compatible with this. I don't want to make the whole arm really skinny, but I'm going to get the end close to this so that it just looks better. I think that looks like a fairly good taper. It's a little bit heavier than this. I like this better than the other piece, which, as I've said, I'm not as happy with as I would like to be. So now let's go ahead and put a curve in this. Now you'll notice on these that the arms are fairly straight till they get close to the end and then they curve, and that's pretty common. So we'll leave it straight and then we'll just put a curve so that it'll match this. You can adjust all of this later after it's together if things don't line up quite right. You can kind of compare this to your handle to see if that's about what you want. It's probably pretty close for this one. Maybe just a hair more. So that'll sit on there about like that. I think that'll work just fine. Let's do the other arm. So same thing, we're just going to draw it out to a nice taper. Fairly parallel in thickness. So these tapers are looking fairly similar. I'll go ahead and bend this one and see what we've got. I do want these to be fairly close. Like I say, we can do some adjustment when we're done. In fact, a lot of that adjustment could be done cold because this is fairly thin, it's mild steel. But the closer you get now, the happier you'll be in the long run. Okay. Next thing is to mark where we need to punch our holes in the handle in. And to do that, I'm just going to line up the arms so that they fit as close as they can for now. If we need to make adjustments later, we will. And mark that with a silver pencil. Now this is going to be awfully close to not fitting right here. I think I'm going to have to trim one arm a little bit shorter so I can get this short arm down here a little bit. So I'm going to cut that off there and draw that taper out again. So this is just one of the problems with making things a little bit smaller and tighter spaces. Sometimes they don't fit right. But it really shouldn't be any problem to make the corrections you need. Okay, that should work. So we have our first arm there. And now we have plenty of room for the second arm right there. Let's go ahead and put a center punch mark so we can find this to punch it. And we'll punch these just like we punched these. Make sure you're right over your center punch mark. It's okay to finish punching fairly cold. That helps shear the slug out instead of just squishing it side to side. So now I need to do this upper one. And then of course punching this hole looks just like punching the last hole. Let's not forget that we drifted the holes on the arm, so we need to drift the holes on the handle as well. Again, when you work over the Pritchel hole like this with something much smaller, move it around so you don't end up deforming it so badly. You want to make sure everything is nice and straight after you do that. You do a little straightening cold once it's done. I think that's what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this cool. Then we'll do any minor adjustments we need to do cold, do some filing, and then we will put the rivets in. Now you could certainly hot rasp some of this, but it's pretty simple to file. And it's just a matter of cleaning it up and getting rid of any roughness. You might need a finer file. You don't see these used very often. They call it a knife file just because of its shape, but it will get all the way down in there much better. And the degree of finish you put on this is just up to what you want. It'll work just fine even if it looks pretty rough and rugged. Make sure there's no sharp edges. I think I'm going to be happy with that for now. If you need to get in here, you might find a half-round file small enough to get in there, but they're pretty delicate at that size. So a big chainsaw file isn't bad. If you did a clean job of slitting it and drifting it, you probably won't need to do that. So this piece is ready then to go ahead and assemble. I just want to knock the sharp corners off of the arms. And that's really all that needs. I don't think these really need any filing on the edges. So now it's time to assemble these. I'm going to use 3/8 rivets because I punched big holes in these. They don't quite fit, so I'm going to go run a drill bit through them real quick. Now by drifting those holes a little bit undersized and cleaning it up with the drill, that guarantees a nice smooth round hole. And that means everything's going to run just a little bit smoother in the long run. Now, I was pretty sure I had a riveting tool big enough for a 3/8 rivet, but for some reason I'm not finding one. I got a nice bottom tool that fits, but I don't seem to have a top tool. That'll be a new video. But anyways, we've given this a nice little fit up here to see how it works. And these come really close to being just what I want. There'll be a little more cleanup after it's assembled to make sure everything lines up because these points don't quite touch. But we can fix every last bit of that. Now if your rivet doesn't shoulder up all the way, I'm actually going to take this other one apart first. Otherwise it'll fall apart while we're working on this anyways. Just put a monkey tool on there and get that to seat down nice and tight. These don't line up yet, and that's okay, we'll fix that later. For a proper rivet head, you need 1.5 times the diameter of the rivet sticking out of the finished material. So that means it's a 3/8 rivet. That's the same as 6/16, so 9/16 worth of material sticking out here. So this is just a little bit long, so I'm going to go to the grinder and grind a little bit off of that and get that to be just right. Now in with my eyeball punches is something that might be an eyeball punch, might be a rivet setter. It's close to the right size, but not quite. So we'll use it a little bit, but mostly this will be a hammer finished rivet. Yeah, that starts to leave a little bit of a lip, so we definitely have to finish it by hand. So I'm getting a lip on that bottom rivet too, so neither tool is quite the right size, which is too bad. This leaves that nowhere near as pretty as I might like. A lot of things about this pair of calipers that I'm not wild about. So now I guarantee you we're not going to be able to move this arm. Plus it's swung around to the wrong side. But if we go ahead and heat this joint, mostly the rivet, This is just like any other pivoting joint. They almost always are too tight to work right after you set them. So heating them back up and moving them tends to help. Then we should be able to move that arm around. Get it to line up on the side we want it on. Probably easier to actually put it in the vise and use tongs, but harder for you to see in the video. We'll do that again probably before we're all done. But you can see that moves a lot easier now. So let's do the other one. I think because of the way that rivet ended up, I'm just going to do this other one entirely at the anvil. This tool is obviously just a hair too small as well. So we need to make a pair of riveting tools. Now when I do these double arm style, I like to put the arms on opposite sides. So I'm going to put this arm over here. And that one fits a little better, so I don't need to use the monkey tool. I do need to make sure that it's facing the right direction though. Yeah, it's really bad if you put them on going the wrong way. That's better. So I'm going to go trim that rivet on the grinder. And you don't have to use pre-headed rivets. You could just put flathead rivets on this right at the anvil using a piece of round bar. Nothing wrong with that at all. Trying to get the edge of that rivet head down. By using this size rivet, that head fits almost perfectly the swell on from the punched hole, and I really like the way that looks that way. But again, this one's not going to move. It's going to be set up nice and snug, so we'll heat it. And that's pretty good. I'm hoping that tightens up a little bit as it cools, otherwise it's going to be too loose, but it's easy to fix. Now then, we already identified that these don't line up properly, so we need to fix that. And sink that down so it lines up. And then do the same thing with this one. And get all those to line up in the same plane. That's pretty good. We're going to let that cool. And as it cools, I think I'll put a little wax on it just because it's a good opportunity to do that. So here's a double caliper, just almost finished. This side comes together pretty nicely here. That can curl up just a little bit there. This side, on the other hand, either this needs to curl more or this needs to curl a little less. I'm going to have to, I think I'm going to curl that up more, then I'll end up curling this one more, which means roll this up some. I like this to look pretty symmetrical here, but it doesn't matter. It functions either way. And pretty much all of this can be done cold if it's just small amounts of adjustment. Just tap, 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 and then see what you end up with. So that works out fine there. Now I want to make this one match this one. At least outward appearances. It doesn't have to be mathematically perfect. You also notice these move really easy. And that can be a bit of a problem as well. So that's pretty good. So the next thing I want to do is I want to set these rivets just a little bit tighter. We've worked hard to get them loose, but now this one's way too loose. This one's a little too loose. This is a piece of cake though. You just set the rivets a little bit more cold. And that should start to tighten up. Careful not to go too far. That's pretty good. You want them to stay put in use, so you want it to be a little bit stiff. That one may have gotten just a little bit too much. So if you over tighten it, you can just work it, put it in the vise, and you should be able to manipulate that a little bit. That's much better. And the last thing is double check this. That one lines up pretty good. This one's just a hair off, and this looks like it's twisted just a bit. So now that lines up. And that's pretty much done. So in use, if you're trying to draw a bar out to a specific size, whatever this happens to be, doesn't matter what it is, you just set it to the size. So you set the width, and you set the thickness. And now as you're working, you can always check the other bars you're working on and all the other pieces, and check these dimensions. And it doesn't necessarily have to be thickness and width. These could be different lengths or different sizes of different elements, and you might keep 2 or 3 of these handy to check all the different parts of a project. So we now have a completely functional set of double calipers, and they add to my collection here. I got one real long one for bigger, hotter material, one in between, and this one's a little bit smaller. Now this one has a few issues. If you were paying attention during the video, several times I commented about things that I wasn't completely happy with. To a large extent, I'm okay with most of the sizes. I think the 3/16 wide by 5/8 wide is pretty good for the arms, and it's not bad for the handle. But when you get down here to this split point, I think it just looks too scrawny and too skinny. Now this will function just fine. There's no reason in the world that has to change or be anything else. It's going to work perfectly well for as long as you might be blacksmithing. I just don't like the way it looks. Now this older set, this antique set, I like the way it looks much better. But if you really stop to think about this set, this is not just split out of this bar. If we look at the width of one of these right here at the top, that is way more than half the width of the bar. And if you look at the width of the bar right down in here, you can see that it's wider. It went too far. And that's considerably wider than this bar is wide. So this started off as a heavier bar, or it was upset, or something else happened here, and I like that look a lot better. So I think if I were to do this again, I would either start with a wider bar and narrow it out, or since I started with a thick bar and thinned it, I might leave it thick here and peen it widthwise just to establish a wider point there. And if I were doing that and peening it wider, I might also leave a point here and here so that I can get a more dramatic swell at the joint, and that would just be for looks. It doesn't really need it. But again, on this one you can see that it is much wider there. I suspect this might have actually been cut out of sheet metal. It's hard to say. Now I do like the length this one came out. Looks like overall we started with 12 inches of material, and overall this still ended up just right about 12 inches by the time you draw out the tapers and the ring. So the length didn't really change any. And I think this is a real comfortable, practical size for most typical blacksmithing. This thing's really too big. It's the first one of these I ever made. It works fine, but it's a little bit unruly and kind of floppy out there. I think I like this size better. One of the other things I wasn't completely happy with was the way the rivets went, and that's just because I tried to use a rivet header that ended up being a hair small. So I think in a future video we will make a pair of rivet headers that are just for this size rivet, and then maybe we'll make another set of these and try to correct some of the things that I don't like about this set. Now to make the rivet headers, I probably don't have a tool to make the rivet headers, so we'll have to make a ball punch that's just the right size for those 3/8 rivets. I'll check and see if I have one, but if I don't, we'll make the punch, then we'll make the rivet tools, then we'll do this. It's a pretty good progression of how things happen sometimes in the shop. Now this isn't a failure by any means. Like I say, this tool will last you your entire blacksmithing career. It will do exactly what it was made to do. The only reason to make another one is just because I'll be a little bit more proud of it. It's also a good way to develop skills and improve the way you do things. Make something, see what you like about it, see what you don't like about it, then make another one and make those changes. Do you like those? Do you not like those? Did you like something you did the first time better? Maybe it's going to take 3 or 4 of these before you get the pair that you think is, yeah, that's the one I was really going for. It doesn't really matter. They're useful. You might want 2 or 3 of these in the shop. They probably aren't going to go to waste. And if you don't need all of the ones you make, give them to your friends. Heck, you might find this one or the next version of it in a giveaway box when we hit 50,000 subscribers, and that's coming up within the next month or 2. But anyways, I have some work I need to get back to here in the shop. If you enjoyed the video, do give it a thumbs up. If you haven't done so already, I would love it if you hit that subscribe button. Take some time, watch a few of the other videos, share the videos with your friends, but then by all means, make time in your day to get out to your shop, make something, but stay safe, wear your safety glasses, and we'll see you for the next one.